Hi, I'm Tony Russo, and this is Funeral Service Insider from Kates-Boylston. Each episode features conversations about emerging trends and news that affect the death care industry. We talk to people who understand the delicate balance of change in a profession and vocation steeped in tradition. This week I'm speaking with Danielle Burmeister. She's the Vice President of Marketing for Homesteaders, and we're talking about earned media. I've spoken to Danielle a couple times before as a source for different stories, and when I saw that she was giving a talk on earned media at the ICCFA convention, I decided I had to reach out to her and get her on the show, because earned media is just one of my favorite things. I think it's A, very important, and B, it's super cool because it's a recognition that your authenticity is authentic, that it's real. We're going to talk more about this in the rest of the show. So, as always, I do want to encourage you to stay through to the postmortem after the credits because we have some really cool earned media stories that we're going to be talking about there. I also want to let you know that about halfway through, there's a promo code for our upcoming Kates-Boylston Funeral Service Business Plan convention in Virginia Beach, Virginia. It's October 24th and October 25th. It's going to be a great event. I've already been doing some interviews to some of the speakers. There's going to be so much going on there. And if it's anything like the one that we had in Celebration of Florida, it's something you're definitely not going to want to miss. But for now, let's talk to Danielle. So when I saw that you were giving a talk on earned media, the moment I saw it, I reached out to you. And the reason was that I've become a little obsessed with it. I've started a section of Funeral Service Insider, the weekly newsletter, always has an earned media section. I get up in the morning and I look for interesting funeral related stories to write about and to share with funeral directors in case they missed it, because some people don't see, if something happens in a small town in Mississippi, but I think it's relevant, then I can share it there in a kind of more directed format. And I always get a kick out of when someone goes to a funeral director and says, what is it like to be a funeral director? And they get to talk about their business. And same thing with cemeterians. They get to talk about their business and they get to do advertising without making it sound too gross. They get to do advertising without being too addy. Nobody's asking them to sell anything. They're asking them to talk about what they're passionate about. So when I sent you the email, you said, I'm working on it now. And let's get through the talk. And so now we're through the talk. And so tell me, what do you think about earned media? I'm sorry, what is earned media? I guess that was rude of me. Can you tell me what earned media is so everybody knows what we're talking about?
Absolutely. I can definitely start there. And thank you for having me on, Tony. I love this topic too. I'm a little bit of an earned media nerd myself, so I can appreciate it when I find it in other people. When we talk about earned media, there's really kind of three different types of media that make up a marketing mix for any business. Owned media, which is that kind of material that you as a business control, both in terms of messaging and to some extent distribution. So your website, a funeral home website, is a great example of owned media. You might have a website provider that builds that for you, but you're responsible for the messaging, the aesthetic, everything that's on that is owned by your business and you can control it. If you have blogs, if you post content on a social page, even though you don't have full control over the distribution, you still own that content. That's owned media. And then, of course, collateral. So any material that someone is handing out would be considered owned media. And then you have kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, which is paid media. And that is exactly what it sounds like. It's media that you have to exchange dollars for. Mm-hmm. So things like television commercials, newspaper ads, radio ads, a lot of those are things that funeral homes today are paying to purchase. Billboards, I see some funeral professionals that have purchased billboards and had some success with them. Probably the most common paid media that we see in funeral homes is direct mail. You don't necessarily think of it in that sense because it doesn't really fall into the traditional advertising, but it really is. You're paying for that distribution for that list. And then if you're using social media to do paid ads, those ads fall into paid media. So then you think about earned media is really kind of what's left. It's nothing that you own and it's nothing that you pay for. So what is it? And essentially, the easiest way to understand what earned media is to think of it as public relations. It's the things that you earn through having a strong brand and exceptional service. So those are things like media mentions. Obviously, those are kind of the top of mind. Those are the ones that you often include in your earned media section.
Right.
Press releases, when someone calls you up and needs a funeral professional as a subject matter expert for a story that they're doing, that's considered earned media. If they're doing some sort of feature on your funeral home, that's earned media. Those are all types of earned media. But then we kind of have, outside of what we think of first, that still falls under that category and is equally, if not more powerful. So word of mouth is actually one of the most powerful types of earned media that funeral homes can leverage. Crowdsource social content. So that's not the posts that a business is pushing out or the ads that they're buying through social. That's what people are saying about your business on their social presence,
Right.
the comments that they're leaving on your social content. And then another huge one that is relatively new, but has become such a powerhouse for small business, online reviews. That is a type of earned media that is incredibly powerful. So when we talk about the importance of earned media for funeral businesses in particular, it's really important to remember that even though we're looking at a lot of digital mediums and we're focusing a lot more on the internet, people still make decisions about their funeral provider locally. And so things that come out of earned media are usually said about a business by someone who's in the area of that business. And that has a lot more power and a lot more clout when people are thinking about who they want to trust their loved one's care to at the end of the life.
And it also is a good way to kind of think things in to get people in the right mindset. You know, the thing that a lot of funeral professionals talk about is finding ways to talk about pre-need without talking about pre-need and without it being an actual issue, kind of like an ether thing. So what are some of the ways that people can generate that on their own?
The biggest way is just to have a strong brand. We often cite, we do a survey with our policy owners every other year, and we ask them, how many funeral homes did you consider when you made your arrangements? And 74% in our last survey only considered one funeral home. Wow. And so the power of being the first funeral home that comes to mind, the power of having a strong brand, that's the first step. Until you have that, earned media isn't going to do you a lot of value. So you have to kind of do the blocking and tackling to build up that brand first. But then we kind of talk about, outside of brand awareness, there's 4 key areas I think that can really be beneficial. The first one is social media, and that can be, you know, the content that you generate and things that are share worthy. And when I talk to funeral professionals about social media, I talk a lot about getting away from just becoming an obituary engine, that there's a lot of things that they can talk about and humanize their staff and their brand, share stories while still respecting their client's privacy, that are share worthy and that are things that people are going to kind of remember and want to talk about in the community.
Can I just stop you there real quick? Because you kind of hit a button of mine. I always feel like the obituaries are going to get found on the page, and by giving Facebook that extra juice that they don't need, you know, you're taking away from yourself. And so if I write a story and I put it on Facebook, Facebook buries it because it doesn't keep people on Facebook. But a lot of the ways that you can be successful on Facebook is by writing something for Facebook on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and leaving it there. Is that something I'm making up in my head, or do you think that that's true? Or
well, I think there's certainly room for obituaries on a funeral provider's Facebook page. There's 2 reasons for that. One of them is to give the families a really easy way to share that content. You just go to our Facebook page, we'll post the obituary, you can share it directly from there. So there's value in that, but there's also kind of this value that you see, particularly in funeral homes that serve more rural, kind of smaller communities. There are a lot of people in those communities who follow the funeral home's Facebook page to figure out who died. And so you want to make sure that you're essentially becoming a news outlet just yourself like as a funeral home.
Exactly, just like a paper 10 years ago.
Yeah. But there's a way to do that. There's a way to share obituary information on your Facebook page that isn't just kind of dropping the link and walking away. You know, it's contextualizing it. We have in our care this week, Billy Joel. Hopefully not. I love Billy Joel. But we are so honored that his family has entrusted us with his care. Billy was an incredible musician who really, really loved, to be on stage and to tour and all these. I'm making these things up. I don't know Billy Joel. But you contextualize it by talking about who Billy was and how honored you are. And the service will be when, and if you'd like to read more about his incredible life, there's a link below that'll take you to our website. That's how you share an obituary in a way that makes you a person. It makes your funeral home feel like you're not just an engine for taking care of remains. You actually care about the people that you're serving as people.
And you mentioned highlighting, what your staff and things are doing. Are there any kind of really interesting approaches that you've seen that you think work well, or that you think you could recommend as far as posts like that?
I think it can be kind of formulaic. It depends on the type of the ways that you talk about your business. So if your business has a mission where I'll use my dad's funeral home as an example. So my dad's a funeral director. We grew up in the funeral home. When I was young, we lived in the apartment above. And the tagline at his funeral home was, "For a life worth celebrating." And so when he would post things about obituaries, or he would put messages out there, it was kind of predated Facebook because he's an older gentleman, but he would add "For a life worth celebrating" somehow in there. At XYZ Funeral Home, we believe that every life is worth celebrating. We're so grateful that Billy Joel is in our care so that we can celebrate his life with his family. You may not know this about Billy, but X, Y, and Z is some things he was interested in. So you can pull in some of your own branding, some of the ways that you talk about your business, and kind of sneak in your mission, and then hit on a few different things about that individual that's unique and just drop those in there. It doesn't have to be, really, really unique. Not everyone's going to be Billy Joel. Right. It could be they really love to hunt and to fish, and there's nothing that brought him more joy than his 17 grandchildren. The things that are common with a lot of the decedents that the funeral providers handle every single day, but at least show that you were paying attention. You know who this person is. They're not just one more body to you. This is a human being who had a family and a story and a life.
I see. Yeah. And I also wanted to bring you back a little bit. I know that this is a little off topic, so I'm sorry if it's too much of a curveball, but you talked about brand building, and are there some basic things that you see people miss a lot that would make it harder for them to get earned media because they haven't done the right kind of brand building?
Yeah, this kind of comes into some of the other best practices with earned media, but part of building a brand is being visible in your community. And so it's things like being active in the chamber, being active in your Kiwanis Club, the Rotary Club, being out and volunteering, supporting other small businesses, networking, building relationships. One of the things I talked about in my presentation was the importance of influencer marketing. And influencer marketing is kind of a common phrase that gets associated with, the Kardashians of the world. Right. But when I talk about funeral providers, that is not the type of influencer I'm talking about. I'm talking about community leaders, things like teachers, coaches, religious leaders, community leaders, civic leaders, people in their community that are well known and have respect and clout in the community because of who they are, their notoriety, the role that they fill. Build relationships with those people. Make sure that they understand who you are and the business model that you have and the service model that you have, because that kind of influencer marketing can be really powerful. I grew up in a small town that was incredibly religious, and people would ask their pastor, "Who should I call? My loved one just died, or my loved one's in hospice. Who should I call?" And you wanted that pastor to say your funeral home. Right. And the only way that pastor was going to say your funeral home is if he knew the funeral director, he knew the funeral home owner, and knew that they were going to take good care of this family.
And so
that,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, please.
I was just going to say that influencer marketing is just a huge piece of brand building.
All right, we're going to take a second to speak with Lucia Igani, our Director of Marketing, and she's going to tell us about an upcoming in-person event, the Funeral Service Business Plan. Lucia, tell us a little bit about who's coming and what the dates are and all that.
The dates are October 24th and 25th, and it's in Virginia Beach at the Delta Hotels by Marriott. Beautiful location right on the beach. It's a 2-day event. We have a panel of 9 expert speakers.
And we're offering a promo code. This is the first time we're doing this. I'm pretty excited about it. I feel like a podcasting hotshot. But we are offering a promo code for listeners only. It is the lowest price that you will be able to get for the show. And what is the price and what is the promo code?
That is correct. So right now we're running a super early bird rate of $347. But for our listeners, we're offering the promo code with another $50 savings, bringing the ticket price to $297. And the promo code for that is FSI Podcast.
That is FSI Podcast, like Funeral Service Insider Podcast. FSI Podcast. Put that in a checkout and you'll get the additional $50 off the already reduced early bird rate. And that's available till August 27th?
August 27th. And if you'd like to learn more information about this upcoming event, visit our website. Under the events section, you'll see all the information you need with the speaker information as well as the agenda. And you will also have a link there to register for the conference through Eventbrite.
And the link will be in the show notes. And can you tell me about some of the speakers?
We have Tyler Anderson. He's the Vice President of Business Development for Precoa. His session is titled Unlocking Pre-Need, How to Leverage Pre-Need to Increase Case Volume and Average Funeral Value.
Very cool. And then let me again follow up with the fair $50 off. Don't forget to use the code FSI Podcast. And I guess that's all we have for this week. Thank you so much, Lucia.
Thanks, Tony.
I think maybe this is what appeals to me about earned media in general, is that there has to be an authenticity. You can't. I mean, I guess people could pay off the pastor, but it just seems so gross. I don't want to think about it. Mm-hmm. But if you have a good relationship with the pastor or with the people at hospice or any of these influencers, it's because it's legitimately a good relationship. It's not necessarily financial. They trust you because they know you, and they know you because they have come to trust you.
Yeah. And I think I love to share this story about my parents because it really illustrates how good funeral professionals get at building relationships. My dad actually met my mom through being a funeral director. My mom is a pastor's daughter, and my dad had worked 3 funerals in 1 week with my grandfather, who was a pastor, and his wife, who was one of the church ladies that did the reception. And after the 3rd funeral, both of them separately tried to set him up with their daughter. And he didn't know it was the same woman. But he had built these good relationships, just general rapport, because that's who he is. That's who a lot of funeral professionals are. And that followed him throughout his career. He held an annual prayer breakfast for all of the religious leaders in the community. And he cared deeply about things like compassion fatigue, because he experienced it himself. And so they had a candid conversation behind closed doors about, with privacy, what's going on in your congregation that you're struggling with? How can we help each other as a community group? And that built relationships. He used to do a death and dying unit with the 7th grade health class, where he would go in and he would teach the kids about death and end of life. And then he would invite them to the funeral home and he would assign them homework and things like that. He didn't do that because he thought it would make good news stories. He did that because that's who he was. And that's who a lot of funeral professionals are. They view what they do as a calling. They're very service and community oriented. And there's nothing wrong with leveraging that to build your brand. It's who you are. There's no problem with using those relationships you're building to help make sure that you're getting to serve those families in your community. That's exactly why people call you first. It's because of who you are and the relationships you have.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you can see how people would be wary of that. Like, doing a good deed loses its shine if you take a picture of it, Mm-hmm. And I know that a lot of times people are shy about these kind of things. It's interesting to me as someone who, even before I was writing about the funeral industry, try and get a funeral director on the phone as a newspaper person, and they don't want to hear from you. They're afraid that it's going to be, I heard that you're, doing bad things. Is it true? And a lot of times you're just trying to get a good perspective on an issue. And, there doesn't always have to be fear about that. Just like there doesn't have to be fear about, if you're speaking with a school, with a class, then go ahead and you can take your camera out and, well,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not a school class, but you know what I mean? There's nothing wrong with sharing what you've done as long as you were going to do it anyway. And I think that's a hurdle that a lot of funeral directors may have trouble crossing.
There's just a lot of misconception, I think, on both parties. From a news outlet, a journalism's perspective, like they don't know what's behind the curtain at the funeral home, and the funeral home doesn't really know what's behind the curtain in the newsroom. my experience growing up in the funeral home and now working in marketing is I get to see a little bit of both sides and realize that funeral directors are just really busy. And it's not that they're hiding anything, it's just they're really busy. And journalists are also really busy. And it's not that they want to write horrible stories about funeral homes. It's just that they don't have time, to do the research. But I think there's a lot to be said for questioning kind of what I call the smell test. When a journalist who knows a funeral professional, knows their business and has a very positive experience with them, here's a story about something negative going on in the funeral space. That's not going to pass the smell test if they already have this great example of a person in their community that is serving families and isn't doing things poorly and isn't, something sketchy. There's kind of value inherent in that, of being able to be that person that they go to and say, hey, I read this story. How do you feel about this? This doesn't seem like it would match with what I understand your business is. So building those relationships can help in those moments when you have a journalist that's asking about something that's going on in the community that could be a negative story, but now all of a sudden it's not, because they know they have this other perspective and this other person they can call.
Yes, I have two stories I want to share. One is going to be too oblique, so I'll do it as quickly as possible. That happened to me recently. There was a headline, and I called someone who would know, and I said, "Is this a story?" And they're like, "No, this happens every now and again." But one I think that's more salient that might be worth talking about is as I'm interviewing you now in June. There's been a scam going on with people calling, going through the obituaries and calling back families and saying, you owe us more money, pretending to be the funeral director. And, I got the press release on the scam, but as I go through the papers in the morning, I see that a lot of funeral homes actually use that opportunity to reach out to their local papers and say, hey, listen, this is the kind of scam that's going on. This isn't us. Would you do a story on it? And there was a lot of, it was funny because it happened this week. So it made me feel good to see that the funeral directors were taking this opportunity. I mean, it's kind of negative earned media, but it's still an opportunity to educate the public in a genuine way.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that those funeral homes are doing that, where they're reaching out and they're trying to be proactive, because it presents an opportunity for them to talk about, here's how we handle payment at our funeral home. Here's what you can expect. We're going to be fully transparent. You're going to know what it costs before you ever leave our arrangement conference. And then to even take it a step further and say, and here's how we follow up with families. Here's what our aftercare looks like. We're not going to be asking you for money. We're going to be asking to see if you need grief resources, if there's anything our funeral home can do to help you settle the estate. I think it presents an opportunity to continue the conversation and drive it in the direction that shows your business in a good light when you already have existing relationships with those media personalities in your community and can reach out to them and say, hey, this thing is going on. Would you be open to talking about it? I love that they're doing that. That's a great step for their business.
Yeah. And I wonder how often those opportunities come and go without people knowing it. Is there a way to know whether you're missing an opportunity like that or not?
I mean, not exactly. I mean, in not a foolproof way. There's always things that you can do to catch things. You can sign up for Google alerts for certain key terms. I mean, a lot of funeral professionals, particularly in smaller communities, are really good about reading the newspaper, keeping up on advertisements or what's going on in the area. A lot of state associations, if there's something going on, are pretty good about notifying their members. So, I mean, it's just a matter of staying informed and keeping an eye out for those things, and then feeling comfortable and confident enough that when something does happen, to reach out, as those funeral homes are already doing.
Very cool. And what are some of the other things that you'd like to talk about as far as earned media? I keep derailing your conversation, and I'm so sorry.
That's okay. This has been a great talk. I mean, we've touched on a lot of it. The one thing I would say that we really haven't touched on is online reviews. That is becoming such a huge part of earned media, and one that people don't think of first when they think of it. But it's such a huge piece of how we make decisions as consumers. Like, I think of my own experiences. We just purchased a house and needed to get lawn service, and we needed to get a fence. And I have no idea who in my area does those things. I don't know who to go to. I don't have a great network of lawn care specialists that, in my Rolodex. And so I went to Google and I read reviews, and I chose solely based on what I was seeing, who I was going to call for quotes, and ended up going with the people that had the best reviews because I knew I could trust the word of mouth that I was seeing on the screen. And that is absolutely true for funeral professionals as well. So we talk a lot about Google reviews and the importance of making sure that your online presence is neat and tidy in that respect. And it's a terrible joke, but we say it all the time that, you can't cremate a bad review, but you can bury it with good reviews. So it's just so important because consumers, if you think about, if funeral professionals can take off their I'm a funeral professional hat and put themselves just in their own consumer mindset, how do they make purchase decisions? I guarantee 95% of them are using reviews, or they're asking their friends and family for recommendations, which is kind of the non-digital version of that. And so I think as a society kind of understand that there's so much value in that. And funeral professionals, absolutely, if they don't have a strategy in place, if they don't have a partner that can help them generate those reviews, that's something that is worth the money that they would spend on it, because it really does guarantee better brand awareness, better brand building, and just a much easier path to be that first funeral home that a lot of consumers think of when they make those arrangements.
Earlier in my career, before I started doing this, one of the things I worked for like a tourism company. And as a result, I became a Google guide, they were called at the time. I don't know if they still are. And one of the things that I would do is I'd go around and I would take pictures of businesses. I still do it. If I go to a business, I'll take a couple of pictures. But I've been doing it for so long that I'll get emails from Google. And there are some places where like I have millions of views of photos that I've taken. And it's always a shock to me that people really are looking at these photos and reading the reviews. Because I think sometimes it can be a little bit less obvious because it seems abstract. But like as I said, when I get these emails, because once a month they'll send me an email, say, a picture of the picture that I took of some bar on the beach, and they say, this just passed 10 million views, and 10 million is a lot of views. Even if 10 million people didn't use the photo to make that decision, it was on 10 million screens in the last 7 years, and that's, as you said, there's not much you can do to do better than that. You can only do worse by really kind of not addressing it.
Yeah, Microsoft does a great. They do a customer service report, and their latest one said that 95% of consumers will read an online review before they make a purchase, and they're 4 times more likely to buy from a business with at least 5 online reviews. And I think that really underscores. It's easy to forget how reliant we are on reviews when we go through everyday life in the communities that we're always, living in and working in. I don't Google, restaurants to eat in my hometown. I know where the food is good, but when I go on vacation, when I'm purchasing a fence, I don't usually purchase. When I'm looking at a big purchase like a car, a computer, or a funeral, those are non-normative everyday purchases. And when people are not sure about where to go, they go to Google. And so it's just really important. It makes a huge difference. And that same Microsoft report, whenever I talk about reviews with funeral professionals, I cite this, that 70% of consumers will complete an online review when they're prompted to do so by a business. And that we see that in the metrics with our partner at DemoniCare, that the response rate that these funeral homes are getting when they just simply ask families to share their experience on Google is tremendous. Families aren't offended. They want to talk about their experience. It was a moving and emotional experience for them, and they want to share it. So I don't think that funeral providers put enough credit in Google reviews, and I think they're a little too gun shy about asking for them, because it's just such a huge and powerful tool for them to have.
Very cool. And that is pretty much all I have for you, unless you have something else for me. Is there something I didn't ask and should have, something you thought you'd get the opportunity to say and didn't?
I think we talked about a lot of different things. So I feel pretty good about what we covered today. I've enjoyed our conversation. I could talk about earned media for days, but I recognize your podcast listeners might be a little exhausted if we kept on talking.
Well, if there's an overwhelming response, we'll have you back for another half hour on earned media, but I'm sure we'll talk about something else before too long.
All right. Sounds great. Well, thank you again for having me. I love talking about this stuff. It's exciting to me. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Funeral Service Insider, the podcast, is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. I've already said it, but I'll say it again. Make sure you check out the show notes because that's where you can get in touch with us, and that is where you can find the link to register for the Funeral Service Business Plan Conference on October 24th and 25th in Virginia Beach, Virginia. If you have any feedback that you'd like to leave, you can send me an email. My email address is arusso@kbpublications.com. That'll be in the show notes. You can also leave me a voicemail. Just call 732-746-0201. And you can do both if you'd like. You can record a voice memo on your phone and email it to me. Whatever makes you happiest. We'd love to hear from you. We get some email feedback. I'd love to get some audio feedback. I think it'd be a lot of fun to have a conversation that way. And I'll play the ones that are appropriate and we can continue this conversation. I always say subscribe where you're listening, and please do. We're available on Spotify. We're available on Apple Music. We're available on Amazon. If you can get a podcast on it, you can get our podcast on it, and I really wish you would. For this week's postmortem, I want to tell you a quick story about flowers. In the upcoming issue of Funeral Service Insider, that is the August 31st issue, if you're listening in the future, there's an, in case you missed it, entitled Send Me Flowers, and it's about an essay that I found online where the author was arguing to stop saying, in lieu of flowers, make a donation. And it hit me because it's an interesting point. There's always this notion, I don't think there's any better example of the idea that funerals are the place to start looking to all of a sudden cut costs and be concerned about waste. The author's name is Lynn Cohen, and I'll have a link in the show notes. I have to say right up front, I don't know if I agree with the reasons that she says you shouldn't make donations, but this idea that you somehow need to make use of the death to do good instead of, celebrating and mourning is kind of a buried attitude that certainly is worth coming to understand and realizing that when you send, $50, $80 to the ASPCA, yes, I'm sure it does a lot of good. But there's also this idea of having flowers at a person's funeral or at the memorial or at the celebration of life. It's worth it. I think it's worth it to give the flowers. I'm certainly preaching to the choir here, but I think that we can start to think about this notion of donating as a misunderstanding about what it is to grieve and a misunderstanding about why we're having the funeral. We're not having the funeral to make better use of the death. We're having the funeral to come to terms with the death. And flowers do that better than donations. I just decided that. All right, well, that's all we have for this week. Please join us next time on Funeral Service Insider, the podcast.